Hello and welcome to the latest edition of CryptoAM, where today we have as a special guest Dr. Nick Almond, who is going to be talking about modeling COVID-19 data and some of the challenges with the actual data and actually forecasting and building up the models. So hopefully you'll find this of real interest today, fascinating subject, which Nick goes into at just the right level for even people like me to understand.
I think the things that's coming up at the moment is how accurate the data is.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've certainly picked up, and I'll touch on it a little bit, is we're looking at what's going on through the lens of inaccurate data.
Yep.
And I think all the data is pretty much an abstraction from the truth at the moment.
Mm.
So I'm kind of worried that people will start drawing conclusions that aren't true.
Yep.
Which is one of the reasons why I'm starting to do this kind of analysis to build a different lens onto the data that you should be able to cross match with reality.
Mm-hmm.
They're called phenomenological models. So you kind of bring in a bit of reality and try and build a model out of it. And then you keep back testing it against other data sets. I think that's where we need to move to. And at the moment, I think the use of data has been pretty weak globally, actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's no standardization.
So I've just muted KOD. I think it's just coming with the mic open. Yeah, I think you're right on the standardization, because that's really interesting. Because I keep trying to stress to people that even though the data might be 100% correct, what the data means might vary. So the simple example at the moment is Germany versus UK with deaths. So in Germany, a death is where there is no other evidence of any other attributable cause beyond COVID-19. That goes down as a COVID-19 death. Whereas I think in the UK, if a post-mortem or a death certificate is signed and there is evidence of COVID-19, even though the person died of cardiac failure or pneumonia or pulmonary embolism, whatever, it goes down as a COVID death. So straight away, both numbers are technically correct, but they are incomparable or incomparable.
This is a really good example. So there's going to be a lot of people, there's a normal flow of people into a hospital for the whole gamut of reasons that people normally get ill. Now what's happening, a lot of those people, so you're talking 15 to 20,000 people a day are going into the hospital at least. They're going to pick it up in that environment because hospitals are hubs of the virus now. So you're just more likely to contract it in that environment anyway.
Yep.
And this is where you get kind of feedback loops of, this is where you get exponential growth when that kind of thing happens. But what that means is that people are coming in with quite serious illnesses, picking it up, and then what do you record death as? And there's going to be different perspectives on the right way to collect that data.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no such thing as truth in data, essentially. You're only ever an abstraction away from reality. You can't measure reality properly. Mm-hmm. It's just too complex. So all you get is a data set that reflects reality in some way. Then you have to interpret what that means. So there's and we've got different recording of the data, so they're not directly comparable. Mm-hmm. So you've got what data set A is collected in this way and B is collected in another. You don't necessarily crosstalk with one another because there's two versions of reality.
Mm. It's one of those things that I kind of wish in a way that the World Health Organization would come up with some agreed definitions and standards of reporting and calculation and definition.
Yeah,
that'd be good.
Absolutely would be. Yeah.
So were you a doctor? Is that a doctor of the medical variety or a PhD?
PhD. I'm a physicist by background, so I did 3 degrees in physics, one of which, and towards the end of that bit of my academic career, it turned into biophysics. So I was researching DNA on gold, in particular, to understand how biological molecules ordered up. So I was working on a physics technique which involved firing light.
Oh, is this like
on gold?
this over at the Diamond Light facility? Yeah.
Yeah, we did some work with Diamond. It's actually close to we were building a different synchrotron up north that never actually got off the ground, called 4DLS, which was at Daresbury Laboratory. So they've got a synchrotron there as well.
Okay.
But they work in different wavelengths, ones that you can look at biological material with. Diamond is X-rays, so it would just obliterate everything. So we were on low flux analysis stuff. So anyway, yeah, I've kind of had a trajectory of working in physics, but over the last decade or so, I've been education, learning theory. And now I'm an associate dean of learning and teaching at London University, which is very interesting, of course, at the moment, because now we're all teaching online. So I'm very busy at the moment. I live in virtual rooms like this one.
Well, has an opportunity to do some of that. Yeah, the Diamond Light. I went on a tour around Harwell, and it's a fascinating place to go around. And
Great place, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I used to be up north as well, as you say, Daresbury, because there's a nuclear facility at Daresbury, isn't there, of some sorts, small scale?
There might be a nuclear. I know there's one of my friends is a nuclear researcher who works at Daresbury, so there's definitely some research there. Whether they've got a kind of reactor there or something, I don't know. But they're investigating different types of nuclear energy, so they'll be looking at fusion and things like that. It's like a science hub now. It was mainly about this synchrotron, but now it's this kind of much bigger science park type place and I've not really kept up with what's going on there for the last 10 years. But yeah, really cool places to be.
Yep, awesome. Okay, Nick, why don't we hand over to you then? You can go through on this. I'll put everyone else who joins on mute. So, as they say, the floor is yours.
Thanks, mate. So yeah, I kind of wanted to introduce this concept, really, of logistic growth. So what a lot of people have been doing is applying kind of exponential models to what's happening. And we are in this kind of exponential phase. But in reality, nothing goes exponential forever because there's a scarcity. So it's an extension of the exponential model to the logistics model, which recognizes a carrying capacity, which means that it goes up to a certain point, a capacity of where the population can go to. All populations are finite. And what the data is following this curve at the moment. So I've been applying these models to it. And I think the world would be a better place if we understood this better, because it teaches us about scarcity. We've largely built the world around this exponential idea, and nothing's exponential forever. So I just want to kind of explain what I mean by exponential growth, because it's kind of difficult to get your head around. For me, it's kind of fabric of reality stuff. It all built around this Euler's number, which was discovered by mathematicians exploring compound interest. And if you take like a yearly, monthly, quarterly, monthly, daily reducing window, it all tends to this ratio, 2.7182. And it's up there with 0, 1, I, and pi is kind of like super important numbers in reality, in my book, at least anyway. So it's difficult to get your head around, and I like this thought experiment for people to get a bit more clarity on it. So imagine you've got a 1 litre jar, and you put a bacteria in it that doubles every minute, and the jar is full at noon. At what time is the jar half full? Don't know if anyone wants to think about that. When do you think the jar is half full?
11:50.
11.
Oh wait.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So
11:59.
A minute before. Yeah.
1 minute before, exactly. So your jar, which started with one bacteria, couldn't see it. At the end, it's full. It's full of like organic matter. It's half full 1 minute to 12 because it's doubling in every minute. So exponential growth just really, it explodes, it has this kind of explosive growth. So if you imagine one of those bacteria, when do you think you're running out of space? And it turns out like 6 minutes to, so 5 minutes earlier, the jar is only 1.5% full. So you can see that the rate at which the jar becomes full. And then at 12:30, 30 minutes later, there's only over 1 billion jars. And that's so exponential growth is this, it's the vastness of it. It's hard to comprehend. But it turns out that, you know, nothing really does that, because you can't create 1 billion new jars. It hits the jar and that's it. So this kind of logistic growth recognizes this carrying capacity that there's a cap to it. So the equation at the top is the starting number, N0, multiplied by e to the RT, where R is the growth rate. So in the previous example, it was 2, doubling every minute. Here, normally you get something in about the 25% range, 0.25, which is where about this virus is. And instead of churning towards infinity, you hit this cap, and this new equation incorporates a carrying capacity, and you get the S-shaped curve instead. So if you iterate through these different growth rates, you get these different shapes of curves. And what I've been doing is just essentially building a model, a simulated version of this, and mapping it to the empirical data. So there isn't an infinite number of people who can get the coronavirus. So there's a maximum amount. And the way to think about it is like a graph, a network of people called transmission networks. So the maximum number of people connected to this network is the available transmission channel. So if we all stay in our houses and socially distance, we sever the connections on this graph by staying in our house. And then if we go to like a shop or something, that will be a node in that thing, as are hospitals. And every time you go to these places, you connect yourself up to the graph temporarily. So what this does, it'll have a carrying capacity to the size of the network. This is what happened in China. I think there was 2, they call it a data rebalancing, but I think it was more likely that there was a breakthrough into a new transmission network. And through their radical social distancing measures, they managed to lock it down to about 80,000 cases. And it's just starting to separate a little bit off that, but it's interesting. They're managing to keep it below 100 cases a day or thereabouts, which might be the amount of people you can contain through contact tracing. Or it's not real, and we don't know. This is what Korea looks like. It didn't really follow the model straight away, but so I think this is potentially a data artifact. Or the way to think about it is there's lots of these S curves all summing together to start with. It's actually kind of fractal. And it followed this perfectly and then started to sort of get a bit noisy. It turns almost linear. And I think that means you enter into a phase where you're doing effective contact tracing. This is the UK model. This point where we're just separating here is today's data. So I built a model that predicted around 35,000 total infections. On about March the 12th is when I drew that red line. And it's followed that for about 2 weeks and then it's just jumped off. So what I think might have happened is there's a new net part of the network has opened up, and more transmission is happening, maybe through the hospitals or something. This is the rest of the world data, and you can see this is like the perfect exponential. There's no need for the logistics curve here. You just alter the rate. But as things develop, things start to curl over. And again, the rest of the world graph's looking a bit like the UK. It was tracking for about 3 to 4 weeks when I drew the red line. And then we just jumped off it, which means that a new part of the network has opened up. Italy's a weird one. I've tried to build a model that sums 2 of these logistics curves together and it kind of maps, but then it's just gone linear at the end. And what I think is happening here is that the data is just not being collected anymore. I think with the separation between the curves is where the data is not accurately reflecting reality, because people can't test enough. There's just not enough tests. So what's happening now is that the confirmations are starting to separate from the models, because reality is not being reflected. This reflects reality more than the data does now. So what we were talking about earlier. But deaths are more real. So obviously there's there's a huge amount of this transmission network. Some people are getting a runny nose and a cough for a week and being fine. And then a subset of that population ends in a kind of critical condition and goes into a hospital. They're the ones that we're actually measuring the cases of, largely, a bit more. We've got a slightly wider window on, I'm super ill, test me for COVID. There's a bit more on that, which is I've got a dry cough, and I've got ticking a few symptoms boxes, then I'm getting tested. But everything else is kind of woolly data-wise. But the deaths are obviously much more real. But like you said earlier, Gary, that even the rate at which these are being recorded is not real, because what's being counted as a Italy death. But largely this model, if you just take out the confirmed cases and just look at deaths, it's back to a logistics curve model. And this is predicting a kind of a slowdown in death rate to about 17,000 deaths in Italy. However, I do think it might jump above if things get overwhelmed. And that's largely it. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that or any questions.
Let me see if I can unmute everybody so they get the chance, because of a feeling that, there we go. Everyone's unmuted. Anyone have any questions for Nick?
So I have a silly question. So it seems like the data now does not follow a model. Now,
Yeah,
I don't
in some cases.
Yeah. So in which cases do we see the data following it?
So the data is following it pretty accurately. It's been very, very accurate in the early phases of the evidence. So you can see that this is the rest of the world model, was perfect for a period. The UK one was until yesterday following this one absolutely perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
So today we've collected more data, or more cases have happened, or a new transmission network has opened up, and the reality just got more complex than this model. So
Gotcha.
the models aren't reality; they're an abstraction of reality, and they're correct for a period of time, and then reality gets more complex, and then you have to build a new model that represents. So up to now, and you can see Korea here as a kind of separation at the beginning. The model didn't work there, but it did for about a month. And then it's sort of breaking up because something weird is happening there.
Nick,
so when things are contained, something else is happening. Yeah.
Gotcha. Where the data ceases to reflect the model, which I know is a bit of a flawed thing anyway, is it possible that something as simple as, like in the UK, they've started testing more actively now, and that means that the number of cases will take this sudden leap, as you demonstrate there. And with other places, as you say, with Italy, it's gone linear as opposed to exponential, simply because they've stopped recording cases in some way.
Absolutely. So what you've just made me realize there is that I just thought what China said was that this was a new way of testing. What I suspected happened was that they broadened their testing frequency. So in this red line, the model was tracking this one perfectly, and then jumped to a new model which had a higher carrying capacity. What I suspect happened there was they broadened the sampling range on their testing.
Yeah,
and more data got collected. Yeah.
Because the thing I found interesting, I was watching the China data fairly early on, and it was following a way too tight a correlation between number of cases and number of deaths. I think it was maintaining by the day 2.1%, which meant every day that they reported more cases, they reported 2.1% more deaths, and it followed that wave. And it just struck me that this wasn't that the data was following the model, it was that they were using a model to generate the data. And I do wonder if that went on for a while and reality kicked in.
I don't know, because I would expect I wouldn't be doing this if I thought these models wouldn't work very well. And actually, what I would expect is incredibly high correlation to some of these models. Like exactly like this is quite remarkable, to be honest. Almost too remarkable, like you say. So what the argument there is that this is mapping so well that it can't be real. But actually, this has been proven to model ecological things quite well for a long period of time. So it's actually what happens in ecological systems. The virus kills a fraction of people pretty uniformly. So the CFR, given appropriate conditions of curing people in a hospital, should actually be remarkably close to about 2.1% or whatever it ends up as, because the virus does what the virus does. And over a large enough population, you will get a very tight correlation around a very specific percentage and risk profile across lots of different reasons for the weakness. So we found that young people are less prone to dying, this by quite considerable margins, by thousands of % difference in risk. And there'll be lots of other genetic factors. It might be comorbidities and other related diseases that are particularly susceptible to death, but ultimately that all average down to a percentage.
Yep. And
if the Chinese healthcare system was good enough, it could have just converged on whatever the virus does percentage. But I agree with you; it's almost too tight a correlation. And what's going to be interesting is when the measures get released, which is what's happening in Wuhan at the moment. I would expect a leap again. So I'll try and dig up I'll reshare my screen in a second. I'm just going to find a simulation of this. So the next stage of the model that I'm developing is to we will leap above higher carrying capacity, and you'll have this kind of fluctuated line like this up into the future. So when China release their measures, we should see another S-curve happen again as it breaks out again, unless they've completely managed to eliminate the virus from their borders completely, which would be honestly a wonder of modern civilization if they managed it. It will be beyond incredible if they manage to do that and maintain their borders and maintain contact tracing to the point where it's 100% perfect, so it doesn't explode into a new population, would be just phenomenal. Yep. I'm not sure it's possible. I mean, we'll see.
I think it's one of those things that every day I look at the data, I keep thinking I can't wait to look at this in a month's time, because then we'll have some more data type thing. It's like you want to be looking in the rearview mirror on this rather than doing what some people are doing, where they're seeing a tiny little blip one day and they're going, "Oh, here you go, things are flattening out or whatever." It's like, no, way too soon.
So what when the next steps for this, I'm building a sort of Python version of this, where the data is quite difficult to get. So we're building APIs into the Johns Hopkins data set. That Worldometer site seems to be drawing from that. And then the World Health Organization published them as PDFs, almost like annoyingly not wanting you to plug this into a data science project. So we're building a script to rip those PDFs down and draw out the data. And then we're going to build a regression model which automatically fits the carrying capacity to the data through statistics. And that will give you a sort of projected future slowing down or even tapering off of the viral spread, which at the moment it's looking like we might be doing in the UK. We've passed our inflection point. And so is, in fact, I was going to try and find a bit of the next model, but I think it's too buried into my computer.
Yeah, we've only got a couple of minutes left on this call, by the way.
Yeah, fine. So anyone's got any other questions, feel free to fire away. So there's the UK. It looked to me, where are we? Like we were following this model, and then this has just happened today.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd expect a new higher carrying capacity to be developed.
David, Coyote, any quick questions? We're going to lose this session in the next couple of minutes because Zoom limits us to 40 minutes. But
I'm good. Thank you, Nick.
No problem.
Send me it. Thanks for the insight.
Yes, no problem.
excellent. Well, in that case, Nick, thanks very much for sharing that. It was really interesting. I've seen some of this in the past, but it's actually getting it talked through that helps you understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, it's difficult to get your head around the concepts. I think people haven't. I mean, generally there isn't that. I mean, I used to teach mathematical modeling, so I obviously thought about what exponential growth is, and I used to teach it to my students and have to go by hand through the calculations. And it just makes you kind of generally more aware of what's happening, because it's a genuinely exponential phenomenon, and people aren't used to seeing this with their own eyes, if you like.
Yeah,
it's the kind of thing that goes.
I was going to say it's where you see this is where we're going to keep getting newspaper headlines each day. You know,
yeah,
being amazed at how big the growth is. It's like, no, that's normal. The way it goes.
Exactly. I mean, it's the news are saying the most deaths ever today. Well, that's going to be the case until we're past this inflection point.
Yep.
The next newsworthy point is we've had less deaths than the day before.
Yes, for several days.
And that means, and we could be doing that soon, based on what we're doing. And I think that's it'll be when the inflection points hit. That's when it's worth looking at the numbers again.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, guys, I'm going to have to close this session down before Zoom throws us off. Thanks very much for coming along today. Nick, really appreciate you taking the time to go through this. Really interesting. I've been recording this, so we'll stick it up for others in the group to take a look at as well, because I think they'll find it really fascinating, and it'll probably explain a few questions that they've been having at the back of their mind. So thank you everyone for coming along today. We'll run some more sessions next week. Have a good weekend, and as I say to everybody, wash your hands.
Thanks, Gary. See you later.
Have a good weekend. Wash your hands, I guess.
Cheers now. Bye now.
Bye now.